Welcome to Film for Thought, a film podcast by film students for film students. My name is Michael Ortizal, and I am your host. Today we have sort of a special episode. This is clearly a sort of themed episode on Spider-Man and Spider-Man in film. And with me today, I have a good friend of mine, a comic book historian, all things Spider-Man, Sergio Bendaña. I thank you for coming on the podcast, man.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Been a big fan. I'm a med student. I don't really belong here, but I love Spider-Man. I love the Spider-Man movies. Some of them not so much, but we'll get to that.
You can say a long-time listener, first-time caller.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
No, it's nice to have you here, and I definitely wanted to talk about Spider-Man, because I feel like he's a very good representation in what makes a good archetype, like what makes a good character, and beyond that, what makes a character transcend through time.
Oh yeah, Spider-Man is definitely a very timeless character. Like he's been around since 1962. Amazing Fantasy 15, and it's 2020 now. He's still relevant to this day, and I feel like I'll have my children and my grandchildren will probably end up reading some Spider-Man comics or watching his movies.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. It's sort of when a writer or a creator makes a sort of project or makes a character like in storytelling, and it's and to a point where it's even considered like prophetic in a way, because and kids in 1960 could relate to Spider-Man, and kids today can still relate to sort of the character and the essence of what the character is. And I mean, you're the person that I know that has most seen the movies, seen like TV shows, and like read the comics on Spider-Man. How do you feel like his evolution has gone from the page to the screen?
I feel like there's definitely been some change. Like I don't think Tobey Maguire is the perfect Spider-Man right off the page. I love his representation. It is my favorite representation on screen, but he's not entirely comic accurate. But that's another thing. I don't really value comic accuracy too much. As long as it's Spider-Man, you get the core of the character, which I feel they did in the Raimi movies. Then he can have organic webs. That's not in the comics, but he can have organic webs. He can be a little different.
It's still, and there's like room and change, and definitely, but it's still hitting on the points, and it's still like I feel like it's changed over time, even from Tobey Maguire or the 70s adaptation to Tom Holland's interpretation of the character. There's been a lot of like slight fluctuation, but it's still that same essence of character who's went from being kind of insignificant, and went from being I don't want to say detached from society, but just shunned from society in a way, and then just grown, haven't given this power, and then just using it for good, and using it for perseverance, and like the line of great power comes great responsibilities, an iconic line. And it's applicable to anything true, and it's applicable to the essence and the what this character represents as a whole, and why he does what he does, and why he constantly goes over and over and sacrifices things, like and this is, you could agree or disagree in any interpretation of Spider-Man, but to the essence of what makes an interpretation good, I feel like you can see that with each character. In Tobey Maguire's interpretation, he had to decide between MJ and whatnot. In Andrew Garfield's, he had to do something.
I'm not save the city.
He's saving the city
from turning people into lizards.
Lizard something. He killed
Electro.
Killed a dad. Okay.
Jamie Foxx's teeth gap got fixed by electric eels.
We'll get into
that was weird.
Andrew Garfield's interpretation. Nothing against Andrew Garfield, by the way.
No, not at all.
I love him as Spider-Man. I feel like he's one of my favorite Spider-Mans. Like in general, I loved his interpretation of it, but there were just a lot of problems with the product, the final product.
It is flawed.
It does have its little niches,
And
but
there is a small Twitter hashtag release the web cut, kind of like a smaller version of release the Snyder cut, but
yeah.
you know.
But I mean, beyond that, there's still an essence to what the character is, and I feel like they all strive for sacrifice and strive for good. And I mean, do you have a preference? I mean, since like the knowledge that you have of the character, do you have a preference of how the character is written or how the character is like represented through like the comics or the TV shows, or like what do you feel like has been like most accurate representation?
So most accurate, uh, I'm really into Spectacular Spider-Man, like, and Ultimate Spider-Man as well. But if we're talking about main universe Spider-Man, then I think Spectacular is the way to go. Like
As
one of
in the
the
animated TV show.
the animated TV show. Yeah, sorry, in case you didn't know. But like in the Tobey Maguire version, Peter is kind of depicted as this dopey kid, which I love and I kind of relate to. Honestly, you know me, I am kind of. But Spectacular Spider-Man does give him that edge where Peter Parker is kind of an angry kid and he has an attitude, which is something that was represented by Andrew Garfield. But you definitely see that in Josh Keaton's performance in Spectacular Spider-Man. And, they deal with a lot of Spider-Man stories in, like, classic Spider-Man stories in more modern settings. And honestly, I do feel like Spider-Man works very well serialized. I love the movies, but he does work very well in a serialized format.
Yeah, I've definitely thought that the best representation of any animated or any comic book medium has been transition into animation, which I think it's funny how, I mean, in Japan, in regards to like how manga is just like thrown into anime. It's not the same thing in the Western
No,
hemisphere,
no.
which I think is so interesting because there's a very big divide of when it comes to animation and then comic books. It's always different. Like Harley Quinn's comic books are really different to Harley Quinn's TV show. um Spider-Man's comic books are really different to its component in animation, or I mean also in film. But I mean, getting back into the character and why it's so essential. It's the character Spider-Man, I feel like has a lot to show, and it's and if it's written correctly, and you can see that beyond being written by different characters, or I'm sorry, being written by different authors, and like taken over and over again, as long as like there's a common understanding of who this character is and what these characters' values are, like from Superior Spider-Man all the way
Yeah.
to the 1960s. There's still like a common essence. Obviously, some change like from time to time, and that's true also for the movies. I mean, with like Tobey Maguire's interpretation to Tom
Yeah.
Holland, but there's still a common denominator of that sort of underdog character, and always having to sacrifice more and more and more for good.
Actually, I was gonna say, now that you bring up Superior Spider-Man, how different people have taken up the mantle, and like even what it means to be Spider-Man has been. So I feel like the character of Spider-Man has been deconstructed in a way that it's been taken beyond who Peter Parker is, and it's exploring more what does it mean to be Spider-Man, and that is something that is explored in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, as we have right here with my boy Miles Morales. All these different people, half of them are Peter Parker in the movie, but we focus on Miles, who is not Peter Parker, yet he is Spider-Man.
Yeah, it's something that it's become very integral to, I mean, just the role of Spider-Man, no matter like like Peter Parker or Miles Morales. It's still like the mantle and like what it represents, because eventually it still means like Miles Morales is just the more recent incarnation of it. And Tom Holland's performance and the story of Spider-Man now in the MCU reflects more the story of Miles Morales than it does actual Peter Parker in a way.
I mean,
If
Well,
you if
yeah,
you if
yeah.
you if you get in and read the source material and then go back and watch
You
like
do
the
find lots
MCU
of
movies,
parallels.
there are a lot more parallels than you would have thought to
Ned
be true.
Leeds is literally Genki, Miles' best friend from the comics.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah,
It's
and there's other similarities.
yeah, there's a lot. There's definitely a lot of similarities, but
I feel like in
it's
the MCU, it's in the MCU Spider-Man movies, they focus a lot on Peter having to earn the title of being a hero. And I feel like that's more Miles Morales
exactly like
because
that
Miles
was something
Morales
I wanted to get into too. It's because
because Miles Morales has to because a lot of Miles' story is proving that, hey, I'm Spider-Man too. I am Spider-Man. Whereas Peter's just, with great power comes great responsibility. He has to keep sacrificing even when the world beats him down, like constantly.
yeah, but and what I wanted to go to is, even if it's this interpretation, or if it's this one, it's still the mantle of Spider-Man and what it
Yeah.
represents. I mean, one has to sort of, pick up a mantle, and the other one is just trying to do good, but at the same time it's still an essence of sacrificing, and just have to keep moving on with what they do. And I feel like this is something that's not touched on enough, but since we were watching an animated TV show, I realized that the character is just, it's always put in a specific place where he's against a wall. It's always
Yeah.
sacrificing time, friends, an individual life, and then have to be like, and I gotta fight the good fight. I gotta do something else. I'm helping people. I'm trying to achieve something bigger than just myself as a
Yeah, one of the
person.
big things I liked about the Raimi trilogy and Spectacular Spider-Man, the animated series, was Peter. I mean, sure, he'll have fun being Spider-Man, but more often than not, he does not like being Spider-Man. One of the big episodes of the first season of Spectacular Spider-Man was when Peter had a sort of chemical that was able to take away his powers, and at the end of the episode, his life was going through a rough patch. Like, Aunt May didn't let him go out late. Everyone thought that he was scum. Like, his friends didn't like him anymore. And he said, "This is all Spider-Man's fault. Maybe we'd be better off without him." But then he sees a picture of Uncle Ben, which is a little on the nose, but still. And he says, "No, I'll get rid of Spider-Man when the world doesn't need him anymore." Like, he puts everyone above himself.
Yeah, and it's something like also that like you can't really talk about, because you have to, it's very secret to him, like it's like, I feel like here's where they really solidified the alternate personality, or like the alter ego of Spider-Man and Peter Parker. And it's like having that divide of like, I fight crime, I do all these things, but then I go back home, and then I have to deal with the consequences of like putting everybody before myself. And I feel like this is the reason why I wanted to make an episode surrounded about this character, is because even if the reason why interpretations of this character are good, even if they're bad, is because this essentiality of this character is sacrifice. And I feel like when it comes to storytelling, that's something that a lot of people forget, that you have to put characters in a place where you have to make them sacrifice something more than the other. And I feel like nothing can be more apparent than in Spider-Man and how this is done, like in all the movies.
There is always sacrifice, and I think that's part of what makes the character so well. There are characters that do have to sacrifice everything. There's always sacrifice in a hero's story, but Peter Parker's sacrifice is very human, and I feel like there's some overlap from what I've seen between Spider-Man fans and Batman fans, because the appeal of both of these characters is that they're human. Peter Parker is not a rich kid like Iron Man. He's not a war hero like Captain America. He's just a kid from Queens. And I'd say he's even more human than Batman, because
I
Batman.
mean,
Yeah.
I'd agree with that.
Even with the superpowers, I feel like he's more human than Batman.
I definitely agree with that. He's like, he's like the everyman's hero. He's he was a person that had he has human problems, and in every iteration, like he has that, like his most of the issues he has to deal with would come to like holding his secret identity, are human, like putting his friends aside, putting people in his life as Peter Parker aside, in order to go out and fight for what's
Fight
right,
crime.
and just fight crime in general. And like the character does so well in I feel like in every medium, if it's animation, if it's film or whatnot, and to a point where it can even, I don't know, transcend in a way, because I feel like that, I mean, like getting more into detail with Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse, like that movie wasn't only monumental for its storytelling, but also what it did for animation. And I after watching that movie, I can't remember leaving a movie. I left the movie theater and my jaw dropped.
Oh, of course.
Like I recalled, I was like, I can't remember the last time that happened. I walked out of a movie theater like just jaw dropped.
No,
Like
I've
what just happened? Like something completely insane.
I've never had a movie experience like that, and it barely diminishes with each time I rewatch it. I've watched that movie like 5 times. I've seen the alternate universe cut where they added some deleted scenes. I think the only thing I'm missing to watch is the director's commentary, and each and every time I love it.
I watched the director's commentary, and it's I really liked it, honestly, just because it's and they really went into depth on describing how the process of like meshing
2D and
mediums.
3D.
Yeah, like but the way that they like sort of invented new ways to give it more of a comic booky aspect. And like it's the character in itself is a pillar to storytelling, and I do feel like it's gonna outlive us all in a way, just because it's how how ingrained it is in society, and how essential it is for storytelling.
Yeah,
And
like can you name a single person that you know? Can you name a single person that you know who can't immediately recognize Spider-Man?
yeah, and it's and it just the irony that it went from a comic book that was about to get like taken down from the shelves
Yeah,
to
Amazing Fantasy 15.
a multi-billion dollar industry just like that.